Welcome to the Jump Pod DVD video manual. This DVD is intended to serve as a visual guide and to be used in conjunction with the user's manual. Before we begin, please retrieve your copy of the user's manual so you can follow along as we go. Be sure to read all safety instructions, safety placards, and warnings in the user's manual. In addition to the safety warnings and precautions, you will also find a brief guide to trampoline fitness, basic jumps, as well as games to enjoy with your new jump pod. To begin, locate a suitable location for your trampoline. The area should be level and free from obstacles, both overhead and side to side. You should have a minimum overhead clearance of 24 feet from ground level. Be sure to put your trampoline away from overhead wires, tree limbs, and other possible hazards. Also, be sure to maintain a free space of 7 feet around your trampoline. Now it's time to begin. First, you should become familiar with the various parts that make up your trampoline. You can refer to the parts listing page in your user's manual. When looking at the parts listing, note the different types of parts and their quantities. Let's start with the top rails. The easiest way to put the trampoline together is in 3 individual sections. Each section requires 2 each of key number 1 and 2 from your user's manual. Lay out the top rails in a circular pattern. Note, the top rails have both top and bottom springs, 4 on the top and 3 on the bottom. Place the top rails down with the 3-hole side facing upwards. Next, take the pod connector. Notice that one side of the pod connector has a hole and the opposite side does not. Place a pod connector down between each of the top rails. Connect one pod connector to one end of each of the top rails. Now connect 2 sections at the pod connector. You now have assembled one section of top rails. Repeat this step to make the other 2 sections of top rail. Next, you will need to attach the leg bases. This will require the W-shaped leg. This is key number 4 in your user's manual. Insert one end of the W-shaped leg into the leg extension and push down firmly. Please note that the end of the W-shaped leg may not line up with the leg extension. Pull the free end of the W-shaped leg until it lines up with the leg extension. The tension of the leg assembly helps hold the pieces together. Repeat this step with the remaining 2 W-shaped legs. Turn over 2 of the completed frame sections and join them together. Add the last section to the first 2 sections to complete the frame. The next step is to attach the jumping surface to the frame using the springs. You will have 42 5.5-inch springs. Other trampolines have all of the spring holes on the top of the rails. This design causes the frame to roll inwards on every bounce. With our patented Euro spring design, we neutralize this effect by attaching springs to the top and bottom of the frame. This creates a better bounce and a longer frame life. During the installation of springs, we recommend wearing gloves and protective eyewear. First, lay out the jumping surface inside the frame with all warning labels pointing up and the V-rings with dotted stitching lined up with the pod connectors. Note the little end of the spring attaches to the V-ring, and the big loop of the ring will attach to the top rail. Locate the V-ring with yellow dotted markings and attach a spring to the dotted V-ring to the left side of the pod connector. Next, go to the other side of the trampoline and attach the V-ring with yellow markings to the left side of the opposite pod connector. Be consistent on which side of the pod connector you attach the spring. Now count over 7 V-rings to the left from the first 2 springs you have already attached. Using a spring, attach this spring to the left side of the next pod connector. Now repeat this from the opposite side to attach the bed to the opposite side of the frame to the left of the pod connector. Count over 7 more V-rings and connect the bed to the frame of the left of the final 2 pod connectors. Now attach springs to the right of the pod connectors, repeating the same pattern as before. By attaching the springs evenly, one at a time, on opposite sides, you distribute the pressure evenly across the jumping surface. This makes attaching the jumping surface much easier than attaching them in a clockwise fashion. Note, if you attach the springs in a clockwise fashion, when you reach the opposite side, it may appear that your jumping surface is too small. If this happens, remove the springs and start over. Now that you have all of the springs attached next to the pod connectors, repeat the process by attaching springs opposite from each other, going in the same pattern as the previous springs, until all the top springs are connected. Now simply attach the rest of the bottom springs in the same way that you attached the top springs. Warning: do not use the trampoline without the frame pad, which is designed to reduce the likelihood of injury to the user from coming into contact with the trampoline frame. Lay out the frame pad on top of the trampoline with the straps facing down. Note that there are 2 kinds of straps. Some of the straps are near the frame, and some are near the jumping surface. Line up the 6 holes in the frame pad above the pod connectors. These are for the enclosure poles to pass through. The inner straps should be tied in a basic knot around the nearest V-ring. The outer D-ring strap goes around the top rail and is then secured using the D-ring on the other end of the strap. Repeat these steps with all of the straps. Your trampoline is now complete. To begin the enclosure system, lay out a bottom straight pole and curved top pole with cap so the screw holes line up. Screw in a self-tapping screw. Repeat to form the other 5 enclosure poles. Slide the enclosure pole into the top of one of the pod connectors. Line up the hole on the bottom of the enclosure pole with the hole in the pod connector. Screw in a self-tapping screw. Repeat for the remaining 5 enclosure poles and be sure that the curved top portion of the enclosure pole is pointed inwards, towards the center of the trampoline. First, you will need to assemble the 2 G3 fiberglass poles. Connect the 5 pole sections together until you have 2 long poles. Lay out the enclosure netting and the 2 patented G3 fiberglass poles on the trampoline. Remove the couplings from the end of the poles and insert one pole into the opening of a sleeve on the netting. Make sure the pole stays inside the sleeve as it passes through the 2 openings. Repeat with the other pole on the opposite side. Now attach the couplers back onto the G3 poles. 1 per pole and on opposite ends of each other. Connecting the poles requires 2 people. Each person needs to stand at opposite openings of the netting sleeves. Take the end of a pole in each hand. Slowly walk towards each other so that the poles begin to arch and take the shape of the trampoline. Join the 2 poles using the connector at each end. Hang the netting on an enclosure pole by inserting the exposed portion of a fiberglass pole into the cap at the top of the enclosure pole. Continue by connecting the netting to the enclosure pole directly across from the first pole. Then attach the remaining poles. To secure the netting to the jumping surface, you will need to lace the enclosure rope through the netting and the V-ring. Start at the V-ring under the doorway of the enclosure. Thread a length of enclosure rope through the V-ring. Tie a double knot on the V-ring to secure the rope to the jumping surface. Using the end of the rope with a cap, Lace it through the bottom of the netting about halfway between two V-rings, and then through the next V-ring. Continue to lace the rope through the netting and V-rings in this fashion until you are near the end of the rope section. At the end, tie off the rope section to the V-ring with another double knot. Begin the next section of rope at this V-ring. Repeat this process for each section of rope, working your way in one direction to the opposite side of the trampoline across from the door. Then go back and finish in the other direction, starting from the door. This will help evenly distribute the tension in the netting. There is one final step left to complete your trampoline. Unless already attached, use the included plastic ties to attach the enclosure safety placard to the enclosure netting near the door. Now you should verify that all of the parts have been securely attached. After you have completed this final inspection, your trampoline is fully complete. Congratulations! We're sure you'll enjoy every minute of fitness and play on your new Jump Pod trampoline. Once again, be sure to read all the warning labels and the user's manual before using the trampoline. Remember, if you're missing any parts or have any questions, please contact our customer support staff Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Time. 1-877-927-8777.